Hi, so today I'm talking to Betty Leask. Hi, Betty. Nice to
Hi,
see you
Elspeth.
over in Australia, and I'm here in the UK. So we always have really interesting conversations, Betty, and we were talking the other day about the need to think about the kind of questions we're asking when we're really thinking about international education generally. Obviously, you're a global expert in internationalization of the curriculum, but I think you were making a broader point about the kind of questions that we're asking ourselves.
Well, I think questions are really important because they drive where we go for the answers. So I think, we need to be cognizant of the fact that if we ask the wrong question, then we're not going to get the answer that we really need. So if we, for example, I think of my own work, and recently was thinking a lot about the work that I've done on engaging faculty in internationalisation. And the assumption behind the question, how do we engage faculty in internationalisation? The assumption behind that question is they're not engaged.
Hmm.
If we were to ask a different question, how are faculty engaged in international education? Then we go looking for different sorts of answers. And I think the result of that would be that we'd get different answers, and they would lead us to different questions, and so we'd be on a different path altogether. I just worry a little bit that maybe if we don't stop collectively as a community and think about the questions we've been asking all these years, are they the right ones? How can we move to think differently about how people operate and what we do? We may lose opportunities to do some really interesting things.
So I think you're saying that in terms of faculty engagement, because it's almost like a truism that faculty aren't engaged in internationalisation of the curriculum. And I think you were giving an example of where you thought they may not be engaged in a way that we assume they should be, or we kind of project that they should be, whereas in fact they can be engaged in different ways. You gave me an example of that when we were talking.
So if I think back, I'll give you a different one now because I don't remember that example exactly, but I'll give you another one. If I think back to the work I was doing at La Trobe, and in that DVC academic role in charge of and responsible for internationalisation of the curriculum across the institution, but in a huge job, really busy, not much time to really focus on the detail. But having done that work for 5 years before, just focusing on how do we engage faculty in internationalisation, and I developed the framework and the process model. But when I looked at, and then I had people from within the organisation, from within La Trobe, coming to me and saying, look, I'm doing some stuff, but it's not, I don't know whether it's really internationalisation. And what they were doing was absolutely internationalisation, but it wasn't counted. It didn't fit within any current model that we were using.
For example, what were they doing?
So this was people who, so this was a faculty member, casual faculty member, part-time faculty member, who was doing work in a developing country to assist children who were profoundly deaf, and to assist children with hair lips also who couldn't, and cleft palates, who couldn't speak properly, and taking students into those communities and getting them to do some work with those communities, but to engage with them before they left, when they returned. It was much more than a study abroad program. It engaged the whole class. it didn't just engage students who were going abroad, but it didn't fit because it wasn't an official study abroad program. It was approved by the university, but it didn't kind of have large numbers. So in terms of the university, it could be quite invisible. Then she introduced me to, well, I know somebody else who's doing something really interesting over here. So it turned out that there were a number of people who were engaged in international activities, internationalisation activities that were very worthy, but they didn't count.
Yeah. I think there's, I mean, I've got similar examples from the sort of paramedical sphere, in a sense that where you've got people involved in professions where they're dealing with people from all kinds of different cultural backgrounds and so on as well. In terms of, say, internationalization at home, where you've got therapists working in hospitals, and they'll have, you know, if they're in a city, they'll have incredibly diverse communities that they're working with. So I remember when we were trying to internationalize the curriculum in Leeds, we were coming up with exactly what you're saying. People were saying, well, I don't know, we don't do internationalization because we don't have international students, but you know, we do work with the community in the following ways. And the kind of skills they were developing, it's a different example from the one you gave, because it's not, doesn't involve going abroad, but the kind of skills that are being developed through working with people with different cultural backgrounds, different language skills and so on, they're all in a way moving towards that kind of development of students' intercultural competencies, for example, aren't they?
And I think it's really interesting to think about the number of faculty and staff members engaged in supporting refugee students in local areas, for example. Or another example at La Trobe was a woman who was helping a group of women in Laos to run their own business so that they could provide education for the community. So she had a group of people within and beyond the institution who supported this business, this online business, and poured that money back into building schools in Laos.
Yeah.
You know, just all that sort of work that is often we don't see it. So by us asking the question, how can we get faculty more engaged? That was the wrong question. If she hadn't come to me and I hadn't asked the question, well, how can I find out more about what faculty are doing internationally? Then we wouldn't know that existed. I think the work that you and I have done, you know, with others around, with Uwe and Hans, around internationalisation of higher education for society, you know, thinking about that and pulling that in even as a concept helps us to ask different questions.
So to some extent, the kind of, it's a definite definitional thing in a way, and that we make assumptions that the way we've described internationalisation, international education or whatever is going to be commonly understood across the disciplines. And I mean, you've very clearly articulated that the disciplinary context being so crucial, and that link through then to how faculty interpret it and demonstrate it and integrate it into their curriculum could be very, very different. And of course, we're still here, we're still talking about the kind of Anglo-Western sphere, because then if you think about, and you know, I know you've done lots of work in different countries, and if you think about how all of those issues should be interpreted outside the Anglo-Western sphere, then there are further questions that we need to be asking ourselves, aren't there? So in a way, the assumptions that we make about international education, we're all guilty of having a view of it in a way, which we then assume is being transmitted. So
which is in many ways only human. I know we look at things from where we are. The challenge is to be really critical, to try to step back from where we are and to be able to have difficult conversations with ourselves about what we've been focusing on and how we might refocus or reposition ourselves and others so that we open up new opportunities, new ways of new imaginaries in international higher education and in the internationalisation of higher education.
I think once some of those things become established, it's it's much more difficult to break them down, isn't it? And you mentioned the idea of faculty engagement, but we also had well, for many years, and I think it still goes on a lot, the issue of international students, the deficit model of international students, that, you know, they are problematic, they're difficult, rather than, you know, viewing them as a resource or thinking of them simply as students. So those kinds of things become established, don't they? Become almost, you know, canon, and people problematize these issues somehow. So asking ourselves these questions and opening up the discussions, as you say, to diverse voices. But you were also talking about how we position ourselves and students and faculty members and staff. And do you want to talk something about something around that positioning?
Sure. So I think we have to, if we, and if I go back to that other example, we position faculty as being somehow recalcitrant because they're not engaged in internationalisation in the way that we want them to be. We position international students as being somehow in deficit. We position domestic students as being the norm. Everybody needs to be more like them and behave more like them in the classroom. Then we don't provide space for difference and diversity. And if we also only see, only understand the world from this privileged perspective that we have, then perhaps we don't focus enough on the values that underpin internationalisation, on the values of equity and justice, and, you know, even bringing in climate change and you know, peace and food and all of those topics that I think when I first moved into the field, they were there. They weren't as strong. They became stronger, but I think we've kind of forgotten them. I think we maybe need to even start challenging the values that we bring to the whole task. And that's been done. I mean, IAU some years ago published the you know, the values, and let's get back to the academic value. But it's not like it has to be either or. It doesn't have to be a seesaw, or, you know, we can do a number of things. I still think we have to somehow, as a community, understand the multiple perspectives that are present in the world but are perhaps not reflected in our practice.
And does it make you think then, in terms of your own particular field in internationalisation of the curriculum, I mean, do you think does it mean that you want to reconsider how that works, or think of a different approach to curriculum internationalisation to try and accommodate some of those things that you've just been talking about?
So I think models are really, really valuable and really interesting. But one of the things that I think that has concerned me a little bit about the model that I developed, the circles with the disciplines in the centre, is that was for a particular purpose.
Yeah.
That model came from that question: how could we engage faculty in internationalising the curriculum?
Yeah.
That's why the disciplines are in the middle. That's how we as a group of action researchers got to that space. If you put the disciplines in the middle, you get a certain traditional view of disciplines and knowledge.
Yeah.
And they're driven by the Western canon.
Yeah.
If you were to put something different in the middle of that, but recognise the value of the context, well, you would maybe get a different answer. So maybe if you put, what does it mean to put students in the centre?
Yeah.
what does it mean to put intercultural in the centre rather than international? Maybe we need to move international back and talk about intercultural and international rather than international and intercultural.
Well, of course, you've got that in your definition, but people tend to focus, because we talk about internationalisation of the curriculum, the intercultural, in the kind of shorthand version that we refer to it, sometimes gets forgotten, even though you've got it in there quite clearly.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason I added the global in there as well was to try to pick up the notion of, let's consider the whole world, let's stop sitting on our, in our comfortable little spaces in the global north, thinking about how we want to do things, and then that being defined by default for others as the primary model. So there are many opportunities that I think we could provide for ourselves by challenging some of those models. So yes, my model was built up through intensive work and research, but research itself is never perfect, Theories change, concepts change.
And our experiences change as well, don't they? So, I mean, I know you've recently had 2 years in the States and you've been thinking about all kinds of different things. And I'm sure your own thinking has developed. You've been doing a lot of work in Latin America, amongst other places. And I think as we have different experiences and grow, then our thinking changes as well, doesn't it? And I think this is another thing that you and I have talked about, which was how people shouldn't assume that things that are written down are there and fixed forever, that our thinking changes, our writing changes, and so on, and we need to be challenged in order to rather than simply accept things that are being written. It is important to challenge even people like you, a great global expert on internationalization of the curriculum. You're still revising your thoughts on it, and therefore interaction with students, engaging with faculty from different countries, they're causing you to think differently all the time, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think if we go back to the way that we position people as well, and think about if we're positioning students as partners, so the work that Wendy Green's been doing, positioning students as partners in internationalisation, then we get a very different set of perspectives coming in to the way the questions that we ask, they would lead us down a different path. So again, it opens up those different opportunities.
Still lots of things to talk about, but it's been really great talking to you today, Betty, and thanks for those interesting ideas. I'm sure people find them really great. And
thanks, Elspeth. I can't believe that time's gone so quickly.
I know, it's incredible. Thanks again.